Prometheus. Act 1. The Seeds of Rebellion. Part 1. In the age before memory, when the cosmos still trembled from its violent birth and the primordial powers walked freely between the hollows of creation, there was born to the Titan Iapetus a son whose name would echo through eternity. The child emerged not with the blind fury of his father's generation, nor with the brutal strength that marked his brothers, but with eyes that held a terrible gift, the ability to see what had not yet come to pass. Prometheus. Forethought, the one who sees before. His mother, the Oceanid Clymene, daughter of the encircling waters that embraced the earth, first noticed the strangeness in her son. Where other Titan children played with boulders and uprooted trees, fashioning crude games from the raw materials of the young world, Prometheus would stand motionless for hours, his gaze fixed upon empty air, watching futures unfold like morning mist across still water. In those early days, when the world's clay was still soft and malleable, when mountains had not yet learned their permanent shapes and the seas still debated their boundaries, the young Titan was already seeing the shapes of things that would be. The household of Iapetus rang with the thunder of his son's growth. Atlas, the eldest, bore shoulders that seemed designed to carry impossible burdens, his strength apparent in every movement, every gesture that sent tremors through the foundation stones of their dwelling. Menoetius burned with a rage that needed no fuel, a fury that existed for its own sake, striking out at shadows and substance alike with equal violence. And Prometheus, Afterthought as he would come to be known, moved through the world in a perpetual state of belated understanding, forever grasping truths only after they had passed him by, wisdom arriving like a guest who knocks only after the feast has ended. But Prometheus stood apart from his brothers, neither in rejection nor superiority, but in the simple, insurmountable fact of his difference. Where they acted, he contemplated. Where they destroyed, he preserved. Where they saw only the moment's satisfaction, he perceived the spreading ripples of consequence that every action sent across the surface of time. The dwelling place of Iapetus lay in the wild regions where the ordered world frayed into chaos, where the careful separations that would later define creation, earth from sky, sea from shore, light from darkness, had not yet fully taken hold. Here, in these borderlands, the Titan children grew to their full stature, learning the extent of their divine strength, the reach of their immortal grasp. The very air around them thrummed with potential, with the raw possibility that existed before Zeus would later impose his rigid hierarchies upon the cosmos. Clymene would watch her strange son with the careful attention that only a mother can maintain, that mixture of pride and concern that comes from birthing something beyond one's understanding. She was a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, inheritor of the water's wisdom, the secret knowledge that flows beneath the surface of things. In Prometheus, she recognized something of her own lineage, not the obvious inheritance of flowing movement and fluid grace, but something deeper, the ability to find the path of least resistance, to move around obstacles rather than through them, to understand that sometimes the greatest strength lies in yielding. The boy would sit beside the primordial springs that bubbled up from the earth's deep places, where the waters still remembered the first rain that ever fell. And he would watch, not the water itself, but something beyond it, through it. His brothers would mock him for his stillness, Atlas calling him weak, Menoetius naming him coward, Epimetheus simply not understanding what there was to see in empty air and running water. But Prometheus would only smile that distant smile of his, the expression of one who has seen the punchline of a joke that has not yet been told. It was during these early years that the gift-curse of his foresight first began to manifest in ways that disturbed even the Titans, those beings who had thought themselves beyond disturbance. Young Prometheus would sometimes weep without cause, grieving for losses that had not yet occurred. He would celebrate victories that existed only in the potential of tomorrow. Most unnervingly, he would sometimes look at his brothers, his parents, his extended family of Titans, who ruled the cosmos with their simple, brutal strength, and his eyes would hold the kind of pity one reserves for the already dead. Iapetus, patriarch of this strange brood, regarded his prophetic son with a mixture of pride and unease. Among the Titans, strength was the highest virtue, the ability to impose one's will upon the resistant matter of creation. Yet here was his son, possessed of a different kind of power entirely, the power to see the threads of causality, to understand not just what is, but what must inevitably be. It was a power that made the other Titans uncomfortable, for beings who defined themselves by their ability to shape reality found it disturbing to learn that reality might have its own shape, its own intentions, flowing toward futures that all their strength could not prevent. The education of a Titan child was not a gentle thing. It consisted primarily of learning the extent of one's divine strength, the arts of subjugation and dominance that allowed the Titans to maintain their rule over the cosmos. They learned to shatter mountains with their fists, to drink rivers dry, to stride across the world in 7-league steps that left valleys in their wake. They learned the names of power and the words that could command the elements to obedience. But Prometheus learned differently. While his brothers mastered the arts of force, he discovered the subtle power of understanding. He learned that a whispered word at the right moment could topple kingdoms, that would stand firm against any assault. He discovered that the future was not a single river flowing toward an inevitable sea, but a delta of possibilities, spreading and branching, each choice creating new channels through which time might flow. Most importantly, he learned that knowing what would come carried with it a terrible burden, the weight of choosing whether to act upon that knowledge or to let fate unfold unhindered. The household of Iapetus was often visited by other Titans, those primordial powers who had divided the cosmos among themselves, like children dividing sweetmeats at a feast. Kronos would come, time incarnate, carrying with him the sense of inevitable endings, his very presence making flowers bloom and wither in the span of a breath. Hyperion arrived wrapped in light that had not yet learned to be gentle, illumination that burned and blessed in equal measure. Oceanus flowed through their halls like a conscious tide, bringing news from all the waters of the world. These visiting Titans would regard young Prometheus with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. Here was something new in their timeless existence, a power that did not fit neatly into their understanding of how divinity functioned. Kronos, especially, would study the boy with eyes that held the particular interest of one who devours his own children to prevent prophecy. There was something about Prometheus that suggested prophecy not as possibility, but as certainty, futures that existed with such clarity that they might as well be memories. During one such visit, when Prometheus had reached that stage of growth where Titan children begin to manifest their full divine nature, Kronos tested him. The Lord of Time, father of the gods who were yet to be born and already swallowed, presented the young Titan with a simple challenge: to demonstrate his power as his brothers had done. Atlas had lifted a mountain above his head and held it there for a turning of the moon. Menoetius had fought the winds themselves to a standstill. Even Prometheus, in his backward way, had shown the ability to unmake things, to return them to their component elements, though he could never quite remember how he had done it afterward. But when Kronos commanded Prometheus to display his strength, the young Titan did something unprecedented. He spoke, not words of power or command, not the kind of speech that reshapes reality through divine will, but simple, quiet words that fell into the silence of the great hall like pebbles into still water. He spoke of a day that would come when Kronos' belly would be opened and his swallowed children would emerge, full-grown and furious. He spoke of war between the generations, of son rising against father, of the cosmos torn apart by family strife. He spoke of victory and defeat, of powers rising and falling like waves upon a shore that had not yet been carved from the formless earth. And when he finished speaking, the silence that followed was deeper than any that had come before, a silence that held within it the seeds of fear. Kronos left that day and did not return, but the damage, if damage it was, had been done. Word spread among the Titans that Iapetus' son possessed the gift of true sight, that he could see the shape of things to come, with a clarity that made mockery of their pretensions to permanence. Some sought him out, seeking to know their own fates, only to leave disappointed when Prometheus would only smile, that sad, knowing smile, and speak of choices rather than certainties. Others avoided him entirely, as if his knowledge might be contagious, as if proximity to one who knew the future might somehow make that future more real. It was during this period that Prometheus began to understand the true nature of his gift and its accompanying curse. To see the future was not simply to witness events before they occurred. It was to see the infinite branching possibilities of choice and consequence, to understand how every action sent ripples through time that would eventually become waves, how the smallest decision could cascade into cosmic significance. But more than that, it was to carry the weight of knowledge that could not always be shared, wisdom that would not always be believed, truth that might destroy the very ones it was meant to save. His mother, Clymene, found him once standing at the edge of their territory, where the ordered lands gave way to the primal chaos that still lurked at the margins of creation. He stood so still that birds had begun to nest in his hair, mistaking him for a strange new tree that had sprouted from the earth. When she spoke his name, he turned to her with eyes that held such sadness that she nearly wept herself, though she knew not why. In that moment, she saw her son not as the child she had birthed and raised, but as something else, a bridge between what was and what would be. A being who existed partially outside the normal flow of time, forever caught between the certainty of vision and the uncertainty of action. She understood then that his gift was also his prison, that to see all futures meant to be fully present in none of them, always watching the potential of tomorrow even as today slipped through his fingers like water. The early years of Prometheus were thus marked not by the typical titanic displays of power and dominance, but by a growing understanding of a different kind of strength. While his brothers learned to break and reshape the physical world, he learned to read the patterns that governed its changes. While they mastered the arts of war and conquest, he discovered the subtle power of wisdom and forethought. And while they looked at the cosmos and saw their playground, their dominion, their rightful inheritance, Prometheus looked at creation and saw something else entirely. Potential waiting to be actualized, stories waiting to be told, and somewhere in the midst of it all, a race of beings, not yet created, who would have need of a champion. As he grew toward his full divine stature, Prometheus began to spend more time alone, wandering the borderlands where few other Titans cared to venture. These were the places where creation was still soft and uncertain, where the rules that would later govern reality had not yet fully crystallized. Here, in these liminal spaces, he would practice a different kind of creation from that of his kin. Where other Titans shaped matter through force, crushing it into compliance with their will, Prometheus learned to coax, to persuade, to find the forms that matter wanted to take and help them emerge. He would sit for days beside pools of primordial clay, not forcing it into shapes, but listening to what shapes it wished to become. He would breathe upon the surface of still waters and watch the ripples form patterns that suggested faces, forms, the possibility of consciousness looking back at him. In these experiments, these gentle explorations of creation's potential, lay the seeds of what would come, though even Prometheus, with all his foresight, could not yet see the full implications of the path he was beginning to walk. The relationship between the brothers grew more complex as they reached their maturity. Atlas, magnificent in his strength, began to treat Prometheus with a kind of protective condescension, as one might treat a brilliant but fragile younger sibling who needed shielding from the harsh realities of titanic existence. He would stand between Prometheus and the rougher games of their kind, would speak for him in the councils where physical might determined precedence, would ensure that none mocked the strange, quiet brother who saw too much and said too little. Menoetius, by contrast, grew increasingly hostile toward his prophetic sibling. The fury that burned within him, that meaningless rage that sought only its own expression, found something particularly offensive in Prometheus's calm certainty. He would challenge his brother to combat, only to find Prometheus always elsewhere when his fist fell, always stepping aside at precisely the right moment, moving with the kind of prescient grace that made mockery of strength and speed. These encounters would leave Menoetius even more enraged, though he could never quite articulate why his brother's pacifism felt like a greater insult than any blow could be. Epimetheus, dear, foolish Epimetheus, loved his brother with the kind of simple, uncomplicated affection that asks for nothing in return. He did not understand Prometheus's gift, could not follow the complex threads of possibility that his brother saw spreading from every moment, but he trusted him implicitly. When Prometheus would suddenly tell him not to walk a certain path or not to speak a certain word, Epimetheus would obey without question, though he would only understand the reason days or weeks later when the avoided catastrophe became apparent in hindsight. This dynamic between the brothers would prove crucial in the ages to come, though none of them could yet see how their relationships would shape the fate of both Titans and the mortals who did not yet exist. Atlas's protection would become a kind of prison, his strength ultimately turned toward an eternal burden. Menoetius's rage would lead him to a confrontation that would see him cast down into the darkest depths of Tartarus. And Epimetheus, trusting, foolish, loving Epimetheus, would become the instrument through which Prometheus's greatest gift to humanity would be balanced by Zeus's cruelest punishment. But all of that lay in futures that even Prometheus could only glimpse in fragments, pieces of a puzzle whose full picture remained mercifully obscured. For now, in these early days, before the great war that would reshape the cosmos, the sons of Iapetus grew into their power, each in his own way, each along his own path, not yet knowing that all paths were converging toward a moment of choice that would define the nature of divine justice for all the ages to come.